Good morning, everyone. Happy February, and welcome back to another episode of From the Ground Up, real-time issues with real-time solutions for MWBEs and small businesses, brought to you by Queen Strategy Partners, Nicole Valentine Esquire, Danielle Douglas, and myself, Dr. Stacey N.C. Grant. We are thrilled to have you back again the first and the third Tuesday of each month with some of the best experts that can guide you and lead you in this new world that we've been living in. So 2022 is continuing to move on. I don't know where January went, but we're here in February and we have another great show. We had so much of the commentary coming in from our topic last week. So we're excited about what we'll get into today. But before we go any further, the best part of the show for me is the opportunity to introduce my partner, my sister, the beautiful, dynamic, and wonderful Danielle Douglas. Over to you, Danielle.
And I always say, Miss Dr. Stacey and C. Grant, I love you more. So, with that said, we are excited about part two of real time HR and health solutions for your business in the midst of Omicron. As Stacey said, we had such great feedback from the information we shared with you 2 weeks ago. We had great guests, and fortunately, we were able to bring back one of our guests, Miss Latoya Ellis Aline. She is here with us, and we have another guest because we thought that not only should we bring back the subject matter experts that we had from the last time, but we wanted to add even more value to you in getting another perspective from a legal viewpoint. As Latoya shared with us, along with Latonya, that policies and practices are very important. And so, with that said, we thought it would be important to have a lawyer with us. So, I'm going to turn it back over to my co-host, Miss Dr. Stacey and C. Grant, so she can lead us into the introduction of our guests.
Absolutely. Thank you, Danielle. And good morning, Mecca. Thank you for tuning in bright and early so you could be a part of the conversation. And we're going to have our two guests just share a little bit about themselves. Jerry Graves Esquire is joining us today as our legal commentary. So I appreciate just what his schedule has. And he said, sure, let me join in. This is an area of law that he is familiar with as it's continuing to develop. So we'll have Jerry just introduce himself, and then we'll go back over to the crowd favorite, Latoya Ellis, once again, coming back in and sharing her HR expertise for the audience. So, Jerry, over to you.
Hi, good morning. Happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me. I'm a lawyer practicing here in New York and New Jersey. My areas of responsibility would be employment law and civil rights law. And I'm just happy to be here, and hopefully I could lend some help in this discussion today.
Awesome. Thank you, Jerry. And Latoya.
Happy to be asked to return. I am Latoya Ellis Aline. I have about 20 years experience in human resources with a specialty in labor relations, as well as performance management, talent acquisition, etc. I'm also an executive coach. So looking forward to exploring the conversation and provide whatever information is needed live and in real time.
Oh, I love it. So, yes, this is the part that's important for businesses as you scale and expand, take care of your employees and yourself. So, Danielle, why don't we do a little touch on the recap from the show, our last show in January, before we dive into some additional content today?
Thank you, Miss Dr. Stacey and C. Grant. And I want to apologize because I mentioned our other guest who was on our show 2 weeks ago, and I said Latonya, and her name is Latanya. But it's early in the morning, folks. I'm operating on like 3 hours of sleep, and we got Latoya, we got Latanya, but I did want to make the correction that her name is Latanya. And with that said, yes, we had a great show 2 weeks ago, and we got a wealth of information. Our guest shared with us that really the importance of having policies and procedures in place for numerous things, right? The exemption practices, mask mandates, just a host of things. And again, what was recommended is that you really consider getting legal advice while you're putting these policies and practices in place. In addition to that, we talked about wellness and how important it is to be an example and ensure that you are focusing on the mental health, the physical health of not only yourself as a business owner, but your staff, and making that as a priority. Some of the things that we didn't discuss that we want to speak to today is how businesses are short staffed and how to deal with that, how to find good employees when we have the great resignation and it's so hard right now to identify good employees, and just how to stay competitive, because we are in an employee market, so to speak. They could kind of dictate the wages to a certain extent of what they want. So, with that said, we are going to transition to today and build upon what we discussed 2 weeks ago. And so, with that said, I'm going to start with Jerry since he's new to the show. And one of the things that we discussed was the policies and practices. So, Jerry, what do you suggest from a legal perspective, the policies and practices that business owners should have in place? And how do you assist them in putting these policies and practices together, developing them as well as potentially implementing them?
I mean, in the respect to lawyers, what we do is we litigate claims when there is an issue with respect to this wide area of reasonable accommodations, and we want to see that the employer actually has a policy. Large corporations typically have a policy. They've been proactive. They have policies in place. This is a 2-year problem we've been dealing with at this point. So the policies are there. Small organizations may not have policies. However, they are not really subject to the federal laws like the ADA, which is the law that we're talking about here that falls under Title VII and other state laws. So if you have 15 or less employees, typically you're not really sanctioned in the court system for not having a policy or you're not implementing particular ADA laws. But you need to have a policy. The policy should be discussed with your employees. They should understand the policy. They should have something written, whether it's an email to your employees or something drop in your mailbox. But the policy needs to be clear, because when we're litigating these claims as a lawyer, we're looking to see whether or not the corporation had this policy and whether that policy has been communicated to the employees. Otherwise, they don't know what to do if they have an issue with respect to the vaccine or the various mask mandates. They don't know where to go. If you don't know that there's an EEO office or an HR office or a person that is there to help you, then you can't have your issue resolved. If you can't have your issue resolved, then you could be in violation of the ADA. So we look at that initially. Have you communicated to your employees that there is a policy, and what is that policy?
So that's interesting. I just want to jump in on that when you were saying that you need to have, and for the smaller businesses who feel like if they've had a conversation or it's been word of mouth or a practice, clearly that's not enough if they get into a situation where legally there has to be some additional recourse. So I just want to underscore that for anybody sitting in the back listening today, that you really have to write it down. It can't just be verbal, and can verbal stand up in court?
I would recommend to employers that policy be written and that it is communicated to the employee. It doesn't take a lot to communicate to the employee your policy via an email, or you could just simply communicate that policy via a memo in your mailbox or on your desk, or your manager could call a meeting and provide a presentation of these particular policies, or provide them the information. because this is an old issue now. COVID's been here for 2 years. So corporations will have a very hard time explaining to a judge that, they did not convey these policies to their employees.
If I can jump in here
Sure.
and just share, definitely communicate your policies to the employees, but please, please, please make sure they sign off on said policies, right? And part of the reason is that by human nature, we have selective amnesia. And when you're in a pickle, right? Most employees will say, hey, I didn't know about that. Hey, I wasn't told about that. And if it isn't documented, it doesn't exist. For litigation purposes, make sure as Jerry said, just make sure you communicate the policy, you write it down, of course, but also make sure it is signed off and you keep a copy of that documentation in case litigation occurs. You can present it as proof or evidence in the court of law.
And I just want to have, this is a simple clarification, but I think it's an important one. So what I'm hearing, I'm testing for understanding, LaToya and Jerry, is that LaToya, she's a HR executive, HR coach. She is the person, Jerry, that a business owner should go to develop these policies and practices, because you don't do that. You just come in the process, God forbid, if something happens, and you want to look at that documentation and make sure it passes the litmus test.
Exactly.
Okay. So that is a very important clarification, because
Mhm.
honestly, I may have misunderstood. I thought you are being a lawyer and giving legal advice. You come in earlier in the process. So I'm speaking personally as a business owner. So it's good with that clarification. So folks, you hear from both experts. You got the HR expert who could develop it, and you got the legal perspective as well on what you should expect.
Yeah, I'm a plaintiff's attorney, so I my job is to sue the employer. There are, most of the corporations, that the law firms out there are advising businesses. They're defense lawyers, so they'll come in and they'll help companies put together these policies and understand the various laws that they're subjected to. That would be a defense firm. So you would call or Google, employment defense firms, and you'll get, list of these particular firms out there that will help you put together these policies. Or you can look for an HR expert that can also come in and help your business understand the policies, put together the policies, and put together all the documentation, that the employee should sign, because it's very important that they do sign something. It's important to the employer that you have an employee that has received the policy and has signed off on the policy. I know large public entities here in New York have that policy in place. For instance, the NYPD, the MTA, and the Board of Education. Employees have received an email. And they've indicated that they received it and that they read the policy.
Okay. So I have another question. Again, I'm just building upon this conversation that we're having. Jerry, from a legal perspective, you are looking, like you said, you're looking from a plaintiff perspective. What are the key things that should be in the document? I know Miss LaToya, she is a subject matter expert, so I am not taking away anything from her and her expertise, but you are looking at it from a different perspective with a legal eagle eye. And so what are you looking for when you see that that HR policy document? What are you looking for?
Yeah, I would actually make sure I research, the latest laws, any other cases that have become before the court, to determine what has been considered, a policy that's been written correctly, that would give notice to the employee what their responsibilities are, and give notice to the employee that where they need to go within their corporations to resolve these issues The typical issue is reasonable accommodation. They typically want a religious exemption or a medical exemption. So those the how-to information needs to be in that policy, so they could know where to go in their entity to report or ask for these exemptions. And they should, there should be some clarification there as to, what the ask should be, so that they could be prepared when they go in to speak to their HR professional, or their manager. If they speak to the manager will typically refer them to the proper location in the entity to make their request. And that's typically an HR representative. So we're looking at that document to make sure that they just have full notice of what their responsibilities are, and full notice of what their protections are under the ADA.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it back over to Miss Dr. Stacy and C. Grant.
And so we have a lot of people who are smaller businesses, Jerry, that might not have as bigger standards with MTA and those comparisons. So just for clarification, for those that are listening, explain the ADA so they know exactly what you're referencing. If that'd be my first question, so that everybody is clear on what that is. And then we're going to get into the next part of the conversation.
Yeah, the American Disabilities Act is a federal act, but there's also local laws associated with protecting employees that have disabilities. So there's state laws, there's also local laws, and various communities. But typically we litigate these claims under federal law, which is consistent with typically all the local laws as well. And this act has been put in place to protect, individuals who have disabilities. It could be any type of a disability that would allow you, that may prevent you from doing your job, in the workplace. So if you have, an issue with you've injured your hand, for instance, and you're constantly, and you need your hand to perform your job, then this particular act is in place to allow you to be able to, not have to, leave your place of work and thereby not have any income, and thereby have to quit because you're not able to perform the functions, of your job, because you have lost the use of say your hand. So they'll look at that, exactly what your disability is that you're complaining about, and they'll see whether they can accommodate that disability so that you can continue your job and perform some sort of service at the same level of income. And for instance, I had a case against the MTA where there was a bus driver who had injured his knee, and they're represented by unions and what have you. So they have a lot of protections through their union, so they know where to go. They'll typically go to their shop steward or their union representative, and they'll direct them to the proper. They'll direct them through the process of getting an accommodation. And typically, the accommodation for a bus driver may be that they'll be assigned to another job that you don't have to rely on your knee, for instance. If you're driving a bus, you're constantly, using your knee and your leg. So they may be assigned to another job, for instance, a cleaner, so you're basically walking around, cleaning the, bus stations or whatever, that they assign you to do. Thereby you'll be able to keep your job and you won't have to, leave your employment. So that's really the essence of why that act is in place. And it is required. We need that in place, so folks can continue to work in the workplace without being pushed out because of an injury or some issue that doesn't allow you to perform your job functions.
Fair enough. And thank you for sharing that, because it segues right into our next conversation about wages, and really just understanding that there's a lot going on thanks to COVID with people resigning because of their philosophical, religious, or other views on COVID, and because of a lot of the mandates that have been put in place, there, are challenges around people staying on. So folks are resigning rather than complying with all of these new mandates that are coming out. So how do businesses, and I'll transfer this one over to you, Latoya, as you're seeing people come in and out, and then we'll get it from a legal perspective. How do business owners competitive with wages, people resigning, COVID being a big piece of that? What are you seeing, and what would you like to offer our business owners for consideration in this area, particularly around wages and competition for great talent?
So, most of us are familiar with the nomenclature, the Great Resignation, which is currently underway. What's happening is many aside from the COVID-related resignations and departures, many current employees in the workforce or the market, they're literally leaving their jobs for perceivedly better ones and at an exponential rate. And so many employers don't have infinite financial resources. So one of the things that I encourage employers to do is to focus on the intangibles. If you're unable to provide, say, consistent merit increases, pay increases, free lunches, if you're unable to provide those monetary components such as bonuses, then focus on the intangibles. Make sure that you you identify your high-risk employees, your employees who, if they depart, they will ruin the business continuity, like that one IT guy who is the only person who knows how to fix, a ransomware attack. If you have one of those, please make sure you have conversations with them. And on top of those conversations, please, please, please document. If you tend to have much more success in doing stay interviews. The purpose of those interviews is that you want to get them to stay. But in order for you to get them to stay, you need to know what will keep them here. And more often than not, it is money. But there are intangibles such as folks are leaving for better work-life balance. Folks are leaving because they don't get recognition. They don't feel valued. They want better corporate culture. Some folks don't have strong relationships with their peers, and they're seeking out better relationship with their peers. So as you have the state interviews and you start the conversations, also make sure you're very transparent. If someone wants $20,000 on their as an increase, please, if you can't afford it, don't commit to it. If someone wants a corner office and you're a small business, you don't have that, you can't commit to it, don't do it. Just be transparent. Express to them that they're valued, express to them a long-term plan. And if it is simply not going to work out, create a transition plan so that you can record the knowledge that they have so that your business can continue to run.
Great advice.
Sorry, Stacy. I was about to say, from what I'm hearing from colleagues, oftentimes, and these are colleagues that are still in the workforce, that oftentimes it isn't really the money. I would love to hear, you kind of touched upon that, Latoya, but I think people are just so overwhelmed and they got a little taste of the fact that they can work from home. That gives them greater flexibility with time, helping with the children or whatever, that they're like, go back to the office. No, why? I can be more productive working from home. So it's things like that. I'm finding it's more of, like you said, the intangible things more so than the wage increases, even though we could all use a wage increase. But especially now with inflation, people's wage increases are being eaten up. So, quality of life is when you weigh it, is a little more important. So I would love to hear if you are actually finding that to be the case, or it's 50-50 in your opinion, or people are really still focused more on the wages. Because I think that's important, even though you talked about it, for small business owners to really, really understand that from a global perspective, what is really more important to folks. Because more often than not, they will not be able to provide the significant wage increases.
100%. And so we are definitely seeing that focusing on the intangibles, such as a permanent work from home situation, or a flexible schedule, such as 3 days in, 2 days out, or whatever works for that person. Flexible hours. There are those whom are much more comfortable working late at night because the kids are asleep, or in the middle of the day because they are still contending with the the remote schools. Some people are. And so those are also things that incentives that can move the meter. Additional incentives that can move the meter is ultimately getting a sense for what the person is interested in, right? And trying to create an opportunity for cross-team collaboration so that they can get stretch assignments. Try to find an opportunity to realign that person's roles and responsibilities with their interests, or skill them up so that they can get whatever is needed as a flight risk to transition into another role that will keep them challenged, keep them interested, keep them engaged.
I think that's very important because you have to reimagine how you operate now. The world is just different. And I love that last point that you were making about seeing how you can skill them up, and offer more value for people to stay and participate in the success of the business. Because if there's some buy-in, then they'll feel a little bit more obligated to hang around and not leave. And I would love to also hear from Jerry when it comes to what we're seeing with the great resignation and a lot of what's happening. Some people think they have legal grounds to stand on to resign, and then they find out something a little different on the other end. I'd love you to share if you've gone or seen any of that happening, because I know it's in real time. Folks are thinking they have some sort of recourse and resign, thinking that they might, before resigning, trying to see if there's some sort of way they can still keep their job with what they want to see happen.
Yeah, most of what I've been doing has been negotiating severance agreements for employees. I have not done much work in the area of the accommodations, the exemptions, the medical and the religious exemptions. What people are doing, they're just simply refusing to adhere to the mandate, and they're looking for an exit plan, And what I would do is simply say, listen, depending upon what your job function is and your position in the company, it's very important as to who you are. Is your job, really that important where, or you're at a level within your in your corporation or your small business where, your employee would allow you to separate, via a severance agreement. And so, I may have been, putting together these severance agreements for individuals. For instance, I had, a business manager working at a hospital. And now this person's away from all the various, away from patients. So they're in their little areas, and they're early on a schedule where they're 2 days in, 3 days out. But when the mandate, the New York State mandate hit with respect to hospitals, they had to have that one dose and second dose within a certain time period, or else they had to be terminated. So I went in and simply negotiated, with the hospital, a severance agreement for that particular person, and unfortunately, I didn't want the person working there anyhow. So that gave me leverage to actually get her money, and I was able to get her a sizable amount of money just to leave and just leave them alone about this the vaccine and her desire not to take the vaccine. And so what this does is protects corporations from lawsuits, because what they're really paying for is this release agreement, release from liability. If you sign this, we'll give you money to sign it, and once you sign it, you can't sue us. So they're really paying for you not to sue them, and that's worth money to them, and they'll negotiate what that is worth to them. And it's really a take or leave it situation when you have the mandate sitting there and they have a reason to terminate you. All of the employment statutes to protect employees, one of the key elements of the law is that if the employer has a legitimate reason to terminate you, then it's very hard to overcome that burden as a plaintiff. And there's no better legitimate reason than that there's a mandate there saying you have to um, take 2 doses of a vaccine or you're terminated. That's a legitimate reason. You don't do it, you're out. There's really no way to overcome that, via lawsuit. So yeah, that's what I've been doing mainly is trying to negotiate severance agreements for employees that uh, run up against that mandate deadline and they cross it.
Jerry, I just want to jump in because I think you said something very important, and that is that if those policies and practices are in place, it's hard for an employee to go up against that. Because I think oftentimes as lay people, what we believe is that our freedoms are being jeopardized. And so, although there is a mandate, technically, how can you tell me, how can you force me to do something I may be unwilling to do? And what I'm hearing you say from a legal perspective, if that mandate is in place, you really don't have any recourse in regards to the protection of your personal freedom and rights.
Well, your recourse is that would be the exemptions, whether you have a religious exemption or you have a medical exemption, whereby you could show through documentation or proofs that you adhere to a particular religion, whereby you know because of your religion, you're not allowed to take vaccines and this, that, and the other. There's a very high bar in trying to prove that religious exemption. In fact, that exemption is not even being offered in a lot of these entities, like a hospital and things of that nature. They're just not even, I think Latoya can talk a lot more to what's happening on the HR level with the exemptions. But, they're just not legitimate in the eyes of most companies. You have a better possibility of getting an exemption with respect to the medical exemption if it's legitimate. And it's legitimate if you could provide some documentation, from your medical provider that would, indicate that there is something in that vaccine that could cause, an adverse medical result in your body. And if that's documented and if it can be proven through, whatever medical evidence is available, uh, that can be provided to the employer, and that could substantiate, a reasonable accommodation. And the employer has to go through that interactive process with you to, walk you through, what information you do need to provide them with respect to, medical information, explain that you have to get, various releases, in order to have the employer review these documentations and provide the documentations and even have a direct line in with the medical provider to provide this particular information so that the corporation can review it and make their determinations.
Okay.
So there is hope. I mean, there is a way around it, but I haven't seen much success in folks getting around, um, the various mandates that are in place.
Hmm. So the next question, this question I'll pivot to Latoya to start us off, is we're talking about the Great Resignation. How do businesses deal with being short staffed due to COVID in general, but particularly Omicron, where we've seen that there's been a significant issue with employees calling out being sick. So how do you recommend that businesses deal with that at this time?
That's a great question, but it's a hard question. And the reason is we're all people and succumbing to COVID, right? And so the challenges and further complicated by the Great Resignation, the market is really sparse. So some of the options or the solutions that you can potentially look to deploy are per diems. Per diems are a classification of employment or employee that you have on call, that if someone does call out, you're able to say, hey, I need you in 2 hours to come and fill this particular role. Of course, the person has to be skilled. And as you're interviewing, you go through the normal interview process for that in order to fill that role. And essentially, the person will simply be on call. Now, as it pertains to per diems, usually we have policies in place specific to call outs. So a call out, we usually request 2 hours advance notice. And so if the employee provides that to you, then you at the very least have sufficient time to tug on the coattail of a per diem to say, hey, I need you. And that person has enough time to get to work, right? So that's a short-term solution, and it can potentially springboard into a long-term solution because that per diem can continue to work for the 14 days or the recommended 10-day quarantine period, sometimes 5, depending on the employer. So that per diem can continue to work. And then you can, if the per diem is working out really well, if you have vacancies, use that as an opportunity to keep that per diem on your payroll permanently, whether it be part-time or full-time, based on the vacancies that you have available. So that's the per diems. You have no responsibility to pay health insurance, etc., to a per diem. You do need to keep the hours less than full-time. Full-time is considered 40 hours, and in some instances, especially if you're in a union shop, it is considered 35 hours, depending on what's in the collective bargaining agreement. You can also deploy temporary employees, have partnerships with temporary agencies where you can have a stopgap measure to pull somebody in. Make sure that there are redundancies built into your business. No one person should know everything. And so if you have redundancies, you will have someone who knows a bit about this other person's role, and that person is potentially able to take on some of those responsibilities for a short-term period. Because of course, we also don't want one person doing two people's job for an extended period of time, because we need to stay away or thwart burnout, which is very prevalent in the industry for all, honestly. And then there is the idea of consultants. Consultants are a little bit more expensive. And so keep the cost in mind. However, consultants are usually used for high level roles that requires particular skills. So we would use a consultant on a project-based perspective. And in using that consultant, say you have someone who needs to do some sort of project specific to something that you need, some key role that you need to execute in your company. A consultant will come in, they will either come in with their own resources, being people, or they will come in by themselves with their own, say, computer and tools in order to resolve that problem or challenge for you. You can certainly have day-to-day consultants on a mid-level work delivery product, but I wouldn't suggest that you have consultants for your run-of-the-mill everyday transactional roles, because it can be quite costly. The other thing that you can consider using is a contractor. Same theory that we used for a consultant, but again, you have the opportunity to have a contractor on for a shorter period of time. You have a contract in place, you have specific scope of work, and then you can tailor make that to the needs of your small business or your large organization. The final thing here, and it might be a little costly, but it's really important that we try to find processes that you can automate, right? Especially from a transactional perspective. As an example, you have a receptionist or you have someone whom is an office manager. you can have automated forms that employees can fill out so that if this person is out for an extended period of time, you can send that over. Say Google Sheets and Google Forms will automatically, after implementing such a process, will automatically give you data specific to the information that you are trying to collect by way of the forms. From an automation perspective, you can get a homegrown HRIS system, a homegrown payroll system, or you can get one of the big names such as ADP or Workday. Again, it depends on your price point, but the idea here is to work smarter, not harder, where automation is concerned. And I know that automation is a bit of a hot button topic because it also sounds like you're replacing folks in the labor force, but it is a means to an end. And especially with labor being such a shortage and being so expensive, automation can be a potential resolution or a potential solution for some of the staffing challenges that we are all contending with.
Well, our audience is definitely appreciating. They say, woo, Latanya and Jerry, you're filling me up with some amazing information. And what paperwork is good for an assistant is one question that just came in.
What paperwork is good for an assistant? Ultimately, it depends on what the assistant is doing. If the assistant is manning your schedule, then of course, I guess the paperwork you would need is the scheduling related paperwork, but I would love for this person to expound on the question, because usually as we're transitioning from manual to automated, some of the things that an assistant can do is, or you as an employer can do, is invest in, say, Google Suite, right? That's it's not homegrown, but it's not as expensive as some of the other mechanisms that are out there. And then you can deploy that suite. You can make it you can use that suite to get emails, B, do shared documents, whether it be Word documents, sheets, PowerPoint, and then you have an opportunity to cross collaborate with various teams within your organization. And then that engenders a sense of relationship, a sense of belonging, a sense of giving them an opportunity to meet others from other teams and give them a better understanding of the roles that exist within an organization. And it allows for a springboard into, again, A, creating community, B, creating value, C, allowing engagement, and then hopefully they will remain with some of those components in place.
I think that was Stower. That was Mecca that was asking the question about the paperwork as an assistant, as she's growing and scaling. So that's why this is just so helpful to her today and to others that are listening. If you want to keep valuable employees and also look at ways in which you can fill the gap with the loss of labor, I think those are some very great ideas for everyone to explore on how you can make it work. And, looking at the different per diem options, contractor, consultant. So there are options. At the end of the day, this show is about real-time issues or real-time solutions. And you're giving us some real-time solutions that we can look into. And I don't know, Jer, if you wanted to add anything on that point before we move to the next one, because time flies when we're having fun.
No, you can move on.
Okay, awesome. So Daniel, you want to jump into the next one?
So our other question, which you kind of touched upon, Latoya, and that is, we are living in interesting times. So we talked about being short-staffed, but really, how do you find, and this may be a little redundant, but just in regards to how do you find, is one thing to be short-staffed, is another thing that you are looking to fill a position, right? So some of the things that you discuss, a business owner can employ, but in addition to that, should they be looking on Indeed or, whatever that is? What other resources right now should business owners be considering to identify good employees?
So business owners should definitely consider leveraging their network, their professional network specifically. I would say stay away from your personal networks, only because it gets a little dicey in the workplace when you have to fire your friend, if you have to discipline your friend, etc. So let's stay away from that. But ultimately, business owners would really, really benefit from creating a pipeline. So despite the shortages, despite the vacancies, one should always have a few people in the hopper ready to go. You should know what your key positions are. You should know what your turnover rates are for these key positions so that you know how engaged you need to be or how bulky that pipeline needs to be. That's the first thing. How do you build that pipeline? You use Indeed, you use LinkedIn. You can use LinkedIn formally, the recruitment function, or you can call people from your network by reaching out to them directly, saying, "Hey, I saw your profile. I think you'd be a great fit for an opportunity that I have coming up. Here are the details. Please let me know." It's much like cold calling, that they used to do back in the day with sales, or maybe they still do that. But in addition to that, you can focus on, say, if you're, well, for nonprofits, they tend to focus on Idealist as a source. Career Builder and Monster, believe it or not, are still in business. You can still post your jobs there. And you can also do free accounts or trials. I know we have small businesses here, and money is in essence, because there's such limited resources. And so try free trials of these platforms that I'm mentioning, so as to be able to maximize the potential by trying it out, because everything isn't for everybody, and every platform I mentioned isn't for every role. So get a better understanding of where your various roles will be more visible, and you will have more of a response rate. As an example, when I worked in social services, we used to make flyers, and we used to, hand them out on the streets or go to the subway stations. That might be something that might not be as effective if you're trying to find an HR director. I'm pretty sure that won't be effective if you're trying to find an HR director. So know your people, know your audience, right? But in addition to the flyers, add QR codes. There are programs out there that allows you to add QR codes that will link directly to your job posting via the internet. And so it's the easier you can make it, the more interactive you can make it, is the more you will keep an interested party's attention. Another thing here is trade associations. The co-host prior, Latanya, mentioned chambers of commerce. Absolutely, chambers of commerce are a great resource. Build those relationships, hand out your flyers, have conversations. Folks tend to go into those establishments to try to see what's available in their communities. So why not leverage that as a one-stop shop, right? Facebook groups. We tend to put posts on Facebook groups based on the type of job. As an example, we all know drivers are few and far between because they are so heavily in demand. And so looking for a Facebook group that is consistent with the role that you're looking to hire for will A, give you tools and tips, and B, will definitely help to build your network, and C, will provide a captive audience for job seekers whom are a part of those groups. So whether it be professional groups, whether it be community groups like Black Resources or Black Long Island or Long Island Marketplace, etc., figure out your market and then target that market using the outlets that market would be most likely to frequent or traffic. The final thing here, word of mouth. You can never, ever, ever beat word of mouth, right? I will hire someone who comes highly recommended by someone within my organization or in my network that is a high performer, because birds of a feather flock together is the old adage, and I have found that to be true. So if you have a little money that you can spend it on an employee referral program, because those who know, and they will recommend. And how better to sweeten the pot than to say, hey, if you bring someone in within 6 months, if they're still in good standing, we'll give you a little cut of our profits. We'll give you $1,000. We'll give you $500. Every little bit matters, right? And until we can figure out the tax laws, they will tax it, but at least you'll still get some money.
Well, Latoya, I want to throw something out there. I know that sometimes I look at ONET, ONET, just to kind of help me and provide a template. I will search that particular position and it'll give you the job description. Now I may tweak it, but at least I have a template. It gives you potentially what the wages are. So is that something that is still, in your opinion, in your expertise, a good resource to kind of do your due diligence, as you said, before you start actually doing outreach for it. Because again, with the Great Resignation, you need to have a good understanding even of what the salary and what people are looking for. I don't know if they give you that information in real time.
So you can do salary.com, you could do ONET, you could do Glassdoor. There's a plethora of resources out there that can help you to determine what the range is for a particular role or several roles. You can use it to figure out how to structure your job description. And most important, I'm super happy you mentioned this because there's a law coming up on the books that goes into effect in April that now requires New York employers to post the job range, the pay range for every role. So now you most definitely need to know what the job is paying in order to post the job, but B, as someone who's a job seeker, you also can't price gouge because you have to list it and then you have to be able to justify why you are offering them when you get to the offer stage, why you're offering them X, Y, Z, right? So please familiarize yourself with some of those laws that are out there consistent with employment practices. And to answer your question more directly, yes, Danielle, ONET is a great resource, and there are a plethora of them out there as well that one can leverage as a small business owner or a large employer.
Thank
That's
you.
a good one. We just showed ONET, and we're not being sponsored by anybody yet, so it's free game. Salary.com is out there as well. So there are many others that you can look into, and that was great advice. And I know we only have a few more minutes before we hit the top of the hour. I just wanted to circle back to Jerry for a moment because we have one of our viewers who is looking into creating some new opportunities and expanding. So with that said, Jerry, wanted to just see if you had any advice from a legal perspective when you're looking at your policies and procedures, something we talked about last time, just some maybe quick hits on what you should be considering and thinking about when you're developing sort of your employee handbook. What should they be aware of, especially from this health perspective now, and including just some quick from the ground up tips from our legal resident attorney here on employment law, because she is building out her staff and her team. So maybe just 5 things to consider, and maybe part of that consideration is hiring an attorney.
Yeah, that may be the best thing to do, or an HR professional that could actually work with you to create these handbooks and other, relevant policies that you would need to protect yourself and also to protect your employees and to run your business. So I think Latoya may be able to answer this question better. But what I will close with respect to what I do as a plaintiff's lawyer is that as it relates to COVID, you clearly need to have all those policies with respect to reasonable accommodations and that sort of thing very clear. And I think with respect to small employers, you have 15 or more employees, you're subject to the federal American with Disabilities Act sanctions, and you can be sued. So what plaintiffs lawyers really, the type of cases we really want in this area would be called the retaliation cases, because those are easier cases to prove in court and to get money for our clients. A retaliation case is where your employee comes in and requests a reasonable accommodation, and all of a sudden they're terminated. Okay, so what we'll try and do is come in there and say, listen, you've terminated your employee because your employee requested a reasonable accommodation. That's a violation of discrimination laws, certainly under the ADA, and we need to talk about that. And otherwise, we're going to sue you. And those are a lot easier lawsuits to bring than just a black and white reasonable accommodation lawsuit, because you just can't sue someone because they're coming in asking for a reasonable accommodation. I mean, you can't terminate someone or demote them or anything because they're coming in asking for a reasonable accommodation. The typical accommodation they're asking for is I want to work at home. Okay, so if you want to work from home and you ask the employer, that you want to be accommodated in that way, and then they say, well, you know what, you can't work at home, but you know what, you can stay at home. We're going to you're fired. We love those types of lawsuits. I'll take those lawsuits. So be very careful terminating your employees because they're coming and asking to be accommodated by staying at home.
Thank you, Jerry. And how can people connect with you?
You can connect with me via my phone number. You can call my office at 917-204-0094. That's 917-204-0094, and we'll handle any type of needs you have in this particular area.
Thank you, Jerry. We're going to share that with everyone so that they can call your office if they are in need for this kind of legal support. And we appreciate you coming in and offering this opportunity for us to hear a legal perspective. So we are going to now move over to LaToya to just share a little bit on the comment that we were sharing for Mecca in particular and others who might be in the same situation, and they're building out sort of their employee handbook and creating their policies for HR, just offering some high level, maybe top 3-4 things to consider as you're expanding for those who don't have a full-fledged workforce yet, because we have a combination of listeners who are at different levels of scaling their business. So we'd love for you to close out with answering that, and then I'm going to turn it over to Danielle, who will wrap us up for today.
So some of the things that are really key from a policy making perspective and where scaling is concerned is sustainability. Everyone has a number. If that number is outside of your scale, please don't commit to bringing someone on when you're not necessarily able to sustain that level indefinitely. Sustainability as it pertains to resources. Be inventive, learn to pivot in real time, right? And from a policymaking perspective, communicate. It's no good if it's just in a book. Make sure your managers, your frontline managers are reinforcing, but also modeling. They say people don't leave companies, they leave managers. And so invest in your frontline managers, your middle managers, because ultimately that is where the loyalty lies with the employees. And make sure that they have the EQ that is necessary to navigate the challenges, because it is really challenging out here as we deal with our own issues or challenges on the day-to-day level, and also are responsible for managing the work and sometimes the well-being of the employees that we have. So invest in your middle managers, invest in your frontline managers, make yourself as a leader, if you're a leader or owner, make yourself available to your employee workforce. And of course, create a culture that is sustainable, but that also will continue to give back as much to your organization as the employees are giving to you. They're the lifeblood. We can't do without them. Let's focus on what makes them happy within reason. Make sure transparency is in place as you scale.
Awesome. And how can they contact you before Danielle wraps us up today?
I can be reached on LinkedIn, LaToya Ellis Saline. You can also email me at latoyaellishr@gmail.com. And Mecca, that question about your executive assistant, reach out. I'm happy to share with you any paperwork or that is necessary in order for you to continue to build out that job function.
Awesome. So I'm going to put that in the chat, latoyaellishr@gmail. All right. Well, I think that both of our guests deserve a round of applause. So we really appreciate you being here. And this is what the show is for Danielle and myself. So thank you. But no one will close this out better than Danielle Douglas. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Miss Dr. Stacey and C. Grant. Again, I want to say thank you to our two wonderful guests. Again, you both did not disappoint. It was a learning experience for me personally as a business owner, and I hope for all that decided to spend their time with us this morning. And as you all know, those of you like Mecca who are regulars, they just keep coming back for some more and more and more information. So we love you, Mecca. We love everybody, but I'm just shouting out Mecca because she had a question and she's always here with us. So thank you, thank you, thank you. But we will continue to be here. We will continue to show up and be your partners and provide you real-time solutions for real-time issues. As you all know, for those of you who come and join us every 2 weeks, I always say this is phenomenal knowledge, but it does not mean anything unless you apply it. That is when it becomes wisdom. And so I implore you again, 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 take this information because it's invaluable. This information that these subject matter experts come and give us to make our businesses more profitable and productive. So we hope that we'll see you in another 2 weeks because guess what? We'll be here. So we're expecting you to be here as well. So you can continue to get real time solutions for your real time issues. Until then, have a phenomenal and productive 2 weeks. And we look forward to seeing you real soon.
Okay,
Bye
thank
bye,
you.
everyone. See you on the 15th.
Bye, everyone.